My brothers and sisters, my library contains a book titled The Code of Jewish Law. This 600-page book, printed in fine type, is a compilation of laws that the Jews in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd centuries AD, the time of Mashiach, and the next 200 years, were required to do as a part of Judaism. They did not perform them because they wanted to make fun of Yahuwah. They did it in all seriousness. However, their zeal was misguided. Their zeal, Paul says in Romans 10:2, was not according to knowledge. They were expending their efforts sincerely, working hard, but on all the wrong things. The Jews who were faithful to their religion worked extremely hard. They would put us to shame in the terms of religious zeal. Yet being misguided and misdirected, it was all for nothing. Works are a part of believers. But what kind of works does Mashiach want? Yahusha hints that it has something to do with the commandments or word of Yahuwah, in contradistinction to the traditions of men. Mark 7:14 through 23, and its parallel account in Matthew 15:1 through 20, is another set of scriptures that some believe state that nothing entering into a man can defile him. Therefore, eating whatever one wishes is perfectly all right. Can this be correct? Those who believe this fail to understand the subject of the chapter, which is Yahusha's denunciation of the Pharisees for their rejection of Yahuwah's commandments in favor of their own traditions. Verse 2 introduces the context. Now when the Pharisees saw some of his disciples eat bread with defiled, that is, with unwashed hands, they found fault. The dispute was over ceremonial cleanliness, eating without first washing one's hands, which is not even an Old Testament law, but a tradition of the elders, which the Pharisees had themselves proclaimed authoritative. In addition, beyond this fact, note that the kind of food the apostles were eating is bread, not meat. Mashiach's later comments speak generally of foods and whatever enters the mouth, not specifically meat. Mark 7 is not about clean and unclean meats at all. Verse 19 contains the phrase, thus purifying all foods, and many have jumped to the conclusion that Yahusha declared all foods clean, as many marginal references state. The context, again, the very sentence in which it appears, proves this false. Do you, disciples, not perceive that whatever enters a man from outside cannot defile him, because it does not enter his heart, but his stomach, thus purifying all foods? First, thus is not in the Greek text, but has been supplied by the translators. Without it, the sentence plainly states that the stomach purifies any kind of food put in it, not that Yahusha had somehow declared all foods to be purified. Second, purified is the Greek word katharzazum, which means to cleanse, to purify, to free from filth. In relation to the stomach's or the digestive tract's ability to purify food, the sense of katharzazum in this verse is to purge of waste. This is brought out clearly in the parallel statement in Matthew 15:17. Do you not yet understand that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and is eliminated? Do these scriptures do away with the law concerning clean and unclean meats? Not at all. The parable is a series of contrasts between new and old. It contains new and old clothing, new and old wineskins, and new and old wine. Mashiach's being taken away makes the newness possible. And once that newness is available, it is wholly incompatible with the old. Yahusha begins with an example of old and new garments. No one puts a piece from a new garment on an old one. Otherwise, the new makes a tear, and also the piece that was taken out of the new does not match the old. In Scripture, going all the way back to the Garden of Eden, garments or clothing are common symbols of righteousness. After Adam and Eve sinned, they tried to cover themselves with something they made with their own hands. Instead, Yahuwah gave them tunics made of skin, requiring the life of an animal, representing the Lamb of Yahuwah giving his life to cover sin. Matthew 22, 1 through 13 contains the parable of the wedding garment, whose lesson is that inappropriate clothing will keep a person out of a wedding feast. Isaiah 64:6 says that all our righteousnesses are like filthy rags. The Pharisees had a righteousness, but Yahusha asserts that our righteousness must exceed theirs, meaning that we need to have his righteousness imputed to us, which becomes our new covering, our new garment. As we become one with him and submit to taking on his image, we have a righteousness that does not come from our works, but from Yahuwah's work in us. Thus, we have a contrast between man's righteousness and the righteousness of Mashiach. But just as it makes no sense to tear off a piece from a new garment to patch an old one, so is it also a futile exercise to try to keep our own righteousness intact and use a little bit of Mashiach's righteousness to cover a flaw here and there. The two coverings are incompatible. We have to choose one or the other. The conclusion is that if a new garment is available, we would be foolish to use it to mend an old, defective one. Because Yahusha was taken away, his righteousness is available to us, so we need to discard any thought that our own is suitable. Instead, we must put on his righteousness and be conformed to it so that it fits and covers us appropriately. Clearly, works are involved and required on our part, but without the covering and involvement of Mashiach, those works would continue to be as filthy rags. To understand the new and the old, it is important to realize that the old could have many applications. It is not just the old covenant. In fact, the Pharisees in Yahusha's audience did not actually represent the old covenant. The system of beliefs and practices that developed into Judaism is not the same thing as the old covenant. Certainly, Judaism makes use of the writings of Moses and the prophets, but it also leans heavily on the traditions of Jewish scholars and is infused with Greek philosophy. The Pharisees then were not actually living by the old covenant. Yahuwah intended that covenant to prepare his people for the coming of the Mashiach. Everything in the holiness code, the sacrifices, and so forth, was intended to point to Mashiach. Since the Pharisees could not recognize the object of the covenant, what they were practicing was not what the pre-incarnate Mashiach delivered to Moses. They had gotten far off course. Therefore, the old elements in this parable could be any system of belief aside from what became available through Mashiach. Shalom.